would like to once again reintroduce myself. My name is Lo. I am the founder of Women of Color in Cannabis, and you are joining us for our 7th CannaCareers module, overview of ancillary opportunities in cannabis. We're really excited about this week because we're starting a new journey, which is everything non-plant touching. So if you haven't joined us for our first 6 sessions, we tackle things like manufacturing, cultivation, and basically everything plant touching. But we are here to introduce you to the non-plant touching side of cannabis, hence ancillary opportunities in cannabis. So a little bit about us. Women of Color in Cannabis is a federally recognized 501c3 nonprofit organization. It's a mouthful, but what that basically means is we are not here for the money. We are here to help our community, to service our community, to spread education, to create safe spaces, and to really give a voice to women of color in cannabis. Our goal is to, once again, create safe spaces and share information. So we started doing Canna sessions, I believe in 2018 or 2019, after finding my wonderful partner, Patricia Wright, at a networking event, and she's on this call as well. And we started throwing events, educational events, to find the resources we did not have access to or felt like we could find currently in the industry at that time. So we're based in New York, and in 2018, it was not legal at all. So having, someone who can walk you through the banking process, which is still a struggle, but neither here nor there, or how to write a business plan, what you should be doing in a networking event, what should be your takeaways from a networking event, or just that overall business guide or mentorship. So we started doing our entrepreneurial track, is what we call it now, because Pat was and is a cannapreneur, which is a cannabis entrepreneur. I was a cannapreneur, but then last year in 2020, we realized that not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, and that is 100% okay. But that doesn't mean that you guys don't deserve resources. So last year we decided with 3 of women-owned businesses that we trusted in the cannabis industry. So Anne of Joint Venture Company, who's also on the call, Ashley Boucher of Quality Control Analytics, who's also on this call, and lastly, Danielle of THC Staffing. So through these 3 organizations, and who helps us with marketing and branding and strategy and reach so we can actually provide the services to our community. Ashley, who is the brain power behind compliance and legality, and then Danielle, who wears a wonderful hat of, owning a staffing agency and really using her staffing agency to give people of color the opportunity to apply for jobs and seek employment. So now, ever since 2020, we have CannaCareers. We've been talking about all things plant touching, and now it's time to start the journey of non-plant touching. So to do that, we have 2 wonderful speakers. I'll do a brief introduction and then I'll shut up and I'll let the ladies introduce themselves. So we'll start with Patricia. I think we met Patricia informally via Clubhouse and email. I would say maybe last year, or was it early this year? I think COVID makes the time blur, but I believe we did a Clubhouse with Patricia last year. Once again, shout out to Danielle for doing that. And we really loved Patricia's work. At the time, she was really the voice for elderly consumption and an old community of consumption and older person consumption. We see a lot of times that there's a disconnect between generations, right? And in general, a lot of people aren't looking to cannabis as medicine. And what we appreciate in Patricia's voice is that's very much her scope. So not only did she take her work with the older community, but now she's starting the journey of creating the Cannabis Business Association Alliance, And what we know are both of those are ancillary. So we think that, and we know that Patricia definitely can lend so much of her knowledge to this topic, which is non-plant touching opportunities in cannabis. We also have Shawnee, who also owns a staffing agency, Illinois Equity Staffing, based obviously in Illinois. And once again, this is non-plant touching. And definitely in the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about how staffing agencies present in the industry. But first, I'll say, Patricia, would you like to further introduce yourself? Patricia, you're on mute. I think you have to unmute.
Sorry about that. I'm not going to claim that as an elderly mistake. Since people do it all the time, right? But hello, everybody, and welcome to this conversation. It's really going to be quite informative, I believe, particularly with the people in the conversation. As Lo said, I really have been in the cannabis space for about 3.5 years. And so I'm happy to have the opportunity to share my journey, how I began as a really researcher, novice, writer, using the skills that I had to arrive at the place where I am now a founder of the Cannabis Business Alliance. So we'll talk about that, as the conversation goes forward.
And Shawnee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Happy Saturday, everyone. My name is Shawnee Williams. I'm one of the co-founders of Illinois Equity Staffing. As Lo said, we're based here in Chicago, but we do staffing and services throughout the U.S. We are focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the cannabis and hemp industry. And we are WBE and BE certified, as well as members of a ton of different cannabis associations. But I personally serve on the NCIA Human Resources Committee as the chair this year. And my overall goal is to make sure that people who have been intentionally left out of the cannabis industry are included when it comes to whatever they desire, if that's employment or if that's actual ownership from a licensing standpoint. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, ladies, for giving us your time. And I hope you guys are as excited to hear them throughout the next hour, 40 minutes, because I am. And we have such a great presentation for you guys. So let's jump on in. So we're talking about ancillary opportunities in cannabis, right? But many people may not know how that applies or what does ancillary even mean, right? So if you're thinking about an industry, this is your meat and potatoes, right? Ancillary is anything that surrounds, but also helps to foster and lift up your meat and potatoes, right? So you need a plate, you need a fork. Those are your ancillary, your ancillary tools, we should say, right? So anything that's non-plant touching. So it's providing necessary support to the primary activities. So the primary activities could be obviously the growth of cannabis or the sale of cannabis, but to do so, you need support services, right? So aspects of the business that's not limited to cannabis plants. So you don't have to touch it, but it's definitely help supporting the plant touching or the sale or the transport, all those different varieties and sectors of cannabis. So the takeaway here is non-plant touching. So what is plant touching? That should be pretty obvious, but it's okay if it's not. Are you touching the plant? Are you physically, and when we say the plant, we're talking about cannabis flower. So are you touching the flower in its natural state at all? Or even not if it's natural state? Maybe it's been processed and sent to you for packaging or something. The plant itself, so growing, cultivation, harvesting, packaging, manufacturing, even selling is plant touching. Granted, you may be selling, pre-rolls or you're selling edibles or topicals. Technically, that's plant touching because you are touching the cannabis, right? So it's not only the plant as in whole flower, but any of the reiterations of it. So retail, which is what we call dispensaries, that we call it in, conventionally, that is technically plant touching, right? So now we're going to start breaking down some different options, right? So we know, for example, marketing is non-plant touching, web development, employee recruitment. So accounting. Shawnee, I think this is a great question for you. How important is accounting in cannabis?
I would probably say it's up there. It's pretty important, given the fact that cannabis is still federally illegal. We have a lot of, in the industry has a lot of barriers when it comes to the financial, environment completely around. So from finding a bank to getting a loan to accounting. So one of the things that makes cannabis accountants or cannabis accounting a little bit different is 280E, which is a form of accounting that basically takes any and all activities really related to touching the plant and separates it out. That's why you'll see a lot of really large cannabis companies end up having multiple LLCs to make sure that it's much easier on the accounting side to account for that type of work. So you do have to, it's very important. Accounting is very important in the cannabis industry. And you want to make sure that you have someone that is very knowledgeable on the fact that you're technically federally diverting, or not diverting, but selling a federally illegal plant, technically.
Yeah, and when we say accountant, that also includes bookkeepers, right? Tax preparation, or even just your, general accounting, right? So it's important to think of all the ways, if you have that financial background, and we'll talk about transferable skills a little bit later, there is a need, especially like Shawnee said, when you're dealing with different tax codes and you're dealing with cannabis. So it's very important to be knowledgeable specifically about the accounting rules as it relates, I should say, to cannabis. So not saying that you have to be an expert, but just be willing to learn, because it's going to be very cannabis specific, and the rules are going to be a little bit different. So if you're a bookkeeper, if you've ever done tax preparation, you would fall under the ancillary non-plant touching side of cannabis. We have employment services. So once again, Shawnee, can you tell the people a little bit about what you do and how you do it?
So from the employment side, I specifically focus on what we consider direct hire and sourcing and recruiting. So a lot of the clients that we work with particularly are looking for someone to join the team, not temporarily, but actually be with the company and join the team, for an unforeseeable amount of time. So that's what I focus on. There are some employment services and firms that are in the cannabis industry that focus more on temp, because when it comes to harvest season, there's a lot of temporary work. So that's not something I focus on, obviously, for the main reason that I think temp staffing as a whole, no matter what industry you're in, really doesn't support, I think, the economy as a whole. And so we really focus on roles that are going to be long-term positions. So with that being said, we're on the education side as well. So when it comes to education, we actually get to know a lot of people who are trying to get into the industry as candidates. And that basically attributes to our pool of talent. In addition to that, I always call myself a professional stalker. I'm pretty sure that everyone that works with me in the cannabis industry can attest to that. So with that being said, I focus and I rely heavily on passive recruiting. And that's just really, that's stealing people away from their companies. That's what it is, pretty much.
I appreciate your honesty. Patricia, would you like to add anything to not only the employment services, but the banking as well? Once again, you are building out the Cannabis Business Alliance. So is there anything you'd like to add to either of those 2 points?
I was just laughing at Shawnee's position that she basically stalks and steals, but so that just proves that you never know when someone is, if you're a candidate, when someone is looking at you as a resource for someone else, because they understand what their client, like Shawnee knows what her client needs, and she may be able to see how what you're doing will work very well for her client. I don't really have much to say about the banking aspect, because I don't truthfully know much about cannabis banking, even though I was responsible for large sums of money for the company that I worked for before. But I think that it's really important, as she said, and also I noticed a comment in the chat with one person saying, I think it was Ann, saying that she has an ancillary service cannabis-based business, and she adheres to the Massachusetts cannabis banking laws because her clients are plant touching. I thought that was an interesting point. That's really all I have to add at that point. I think Shawnee hit it.
So this was an interesting one when doing research, because some people might automatically think, and I'm not going to lie, I was one of those people who thought for sure laboratories would fall under the plant touching umbrella. But we have to think about how diverse the industry is, and the different ways that even something simple like testing could be kind of broken out of the plant touching. So for example, if you are a company that's doing at home, that's building or producing, I should say, at home testing kits, that's technically non-plant touching because you're literally just manufacturing the technology that will allow plant touchers to do their job, to get the THC percentage, the CBD percentage, the CBG percentage, but you're not technically touching the plant. So if you're ever wondering or you're not sure if something is plant touching or non-plant touching, one, don't be scared to ask the questions. Come to Woke, come to any other trusted source that you have in your area, but don't be scared to, further your education, do a Google search, because once again, prior to us embarking on this journey of providing this information to you all, I would have sworn up and down that if it's a laboratory, you are touching the plant, and that is not necessarily the case. So that was the one example that I thought it was a really good example. But don't write off laboratories because you're not sure what it is they're actually doing. They could be manufacturing laboratory equipment. And that way, once again, you won't fall under that new tax code. You're not going to have to worry about following certain regulations because, once again, non-plant touching. I personally haven't seen an instance of this. Shawnee, have you ever seen a kind of different lab that wasn't plant touching? And this is just me being curious.
A different lab that's not plant touching. I mean, I'm assuming the other markets do, but here in Illinois, the Department of Agriculture is in charge of licensing labs in general. And there's also a licensing process if you are a lab or a laboratory-based business, if you'd like to also be a cannabis lab. So it was funny here when we legalized on the recreational side, we had a bottleneck situation because we didn't have a lot of labs. It was a handful of labs. And obviously the supply went up for cannabis because Illinoisans could recreationally use. So we were in a situation where we were like, in general, dispensaries were always out of stock, and it really had to do with the labs. So it's definitely another opportunity, and you really don't have to have, you could come in just with a basic knowledge of science. Obviously, like people who work at companies like Abbott would be great at working in laboratories that are testing for cannabinoids and terpenes and other compounds in the cannabis plant. It's really a compliance situation because any company that is selling cannabis or manufacturing cannabis, obviously they have to get approved through whatever department is managing their process, but they also have to have batch testing to make sure their product is safe and it is, it has efficacy based on the label and the packaging. And then in addition to that, I mean, the folks who manufacture the actual huge machines that you insert the product in to actually test the products, like that's technically laboratory ancillary as well. If you guys haven't noticed, most of the industry is ancillary. About 67% of the cannabis industry is ancillary.
And thank you for saying that, because I think, especially in my community, and other communities like mine, where it's very, impacted by the war on drugs. Now everyone sees the opportunity for cannabis and everyone's excited. I find that a lot of my community members are like, yeah, let's open a dispensary. And what I try to do in my community is let them know that there's options, that there's so many options, and they're easier options with less barriers, as opposed to opening a dispensary or trying to purchase land upstate New York, So I thank you for sharing that, because I didn't know that percentage. 60 to 70% is ancillary businesses. So Danielle, who is once again one of our partners for CannaCareers and has a staffing agency, THC Staffing, made a great point in the chat. Many cannabis testing labs also have a lot of ancillary jobs within themselves, like marketing, government affairs, and even compliance and Thank you, Ann, and even compliance. So once again, there is a place for you if you do have that intersectionality of being interested in lab services, but not necessarily wanting to touch the plant. Maybe you'll put together really good marketing to explain what your lab can do for their customers, and you're bridging those two interests. So thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Ann, for sharing. Okay, marketing. So that was a great segue. Shout outs to Danielle. So brand recognition is very important. Woke is learning that lesson. Most companies have learned that lesson, and it's really crucial, especially in this industry when we're hearing things like it's $1 billion industry, it's $1 billion industry. When there's so many companies, how are you going to set yourself apart, right? It's going to come down not only to product, but also definitely down to marketing. So marketing is a big bucket where you can really get into the industry and say you're participating in cannabis, but once again, not having to deal with regulations and really helping build company profile, really helping to kind of set a company culture as it's outward facing. How are people going to feel about the brand you're representing or the brand that you're working with? What do you want them to think of? Do you want them to think you're inclusive and supportive? Do you want them to think that you're more educational based? So every company is going to need some type of marketer, whether it's a third party, whether it's an internal marketing department, little things like a logo, to big things like full-blown marketing campaigns. Like marketing is so important. Patricia, I'd like to ask you specifically, when working with Canna Boomers, how was marketing for you? Was it a challenge? Was it something that kind of came innately to you? And how important in just building out a brand like Canna Boomers was marketing to you?
I actually knew that I needed to brand myself, even though I didn't understand what my brand was at the time that I decided to choose that name. I knew that it might not mean exactly what people thought it did, but I knew that people would remember it. And so I also thought that it was broad enough to represent both where I was coming from and also a larger constituency. So these were the two things that I was thinking about at the time that I said, well, I'm gonna just use Canna Boomer as my handle, because then I can grow into that. You know, that was my thought process at the time that I first began. And so I'm still happy with it. Like, it still works for me in terms of feeling like the outward facing representation that I want for my company, or for the work that I'm doing, and for the people that I am trying to represent, you know, for that segment. It's like, really what I do is for anybody who can use it. But I do really want to be a voice for people over 50 who often are short shrifted as life changes. And that's just the way it is, you know? So I hope that answered the question.
It did. And I love the name.
Thank you.
And it definitely had the energy. And I think, you know, anyone who's worked with you felt, well, let me not speak for everyone. I felt like when I was given the introduction to you by Danielle, that I understood right away exactly what you were seeking to do in the industry, who your community was, and who you were seeking to help. And I think the name was like spot on for your mission. So I love it. Shawnee, same question. How important was marketing to you, especially having a staffing agency? So you need to think about not only, you know, attracting clients, but being not off-putting, I guess, to, you know, people who may want to apply through your agency. Like, how did you set yourself apart from other staffing agencies? I know it's a loaded question. So how important was
it? That's a super loaded question. That's hella loaded. So wow. So I would definitely say, when we came up with the name of our company, no one really thought Illinois. Mm-hmm. So I have one of the things about us is we focus on what we call organic, I guess, business. So a lot of the business that comes to us is through really just natural happenstance, or, you know, previous clients, or, you know, connections or relationships introducing us. And I've had several of those intro emails that everyone always gets where the person's like, but your company name is Illinois Equity Staffing and I'm in California. And I'm like, I'm aware. We didn't think that through. So that's one thing that you guys can look at and kind of learn from my mistake. It is what it is. I'm very proud of where I'm from. So I'm okay with my company being called Illinois Equity Staffing. But another thing for me is it was about the brand and being, and Danielle can attest to this, but when you're talking about a company, you have an internal brand and you have an external brand. So the external brand is what you are kind of, I guess, showing the world, like customers, clients, strategic partners, but your internal brand is really what you, what attracts talent to you and potential employees. And so for everything that I do, I want to make sure that being genuine and having integrity and working through the spirit of excellence, like that is my brand. And also being, I guess, approachable. And so a lot of times when people when I'm at events or if I'm speaking or doing a presentation or something, I want people to be able to engage and cut me off or put something in the chat or be like, hey, I got a question right in the middle of whatever the sentence is. I never want people to feel like they, can't be real and upfront. So that's always kind of been our brand. I'll be completely honest with you. I haven't spent much on, I would say, like visual branding. I work more with marketing companies that can really focus on the work that we do. So, we've worked with the medical cannabis community on some of the second chance initiative recruiting that we've been doing. But we invest more in events because I think I get more ROI or return on investment when it comes to events. So expos, conferences, and things like that, where we actually have a table and we're actually able to meet people, or we don't have a table and we're actually networking. But that's just my opinion. Everyone is different. Every brand is different. A lot of marketing that does get overlooked, though, is experiential marketing. And I think in the cannabis industry, experiential marketing can tell the story in a very unique way.
And can you define that just for the people, including myself, who may not know?
Oh, yes. So my bad. I'm sorry. So experiential marketing, it's creating an experience. So if you've ever been to I can't even think of anything. So we went to I don't want to plug, but I'm plugging right now. We have a group that we love here in Chicago, and they do cannabis events, and they're called they did a speakeasy last month, and their name is Hush, like HUSSSH Chicago. And so they're great, women owned, but they put so much detail into everything they do. When I mean everything, I mean the way what your email looks like when you get a confirmation, what the follow-up looks like, what happens when you first walk up to the door, like every single thing, there's detail to it. And so they're able to use that as a marketing company for their clients and to create an experience. And so when someone goes to like an experiential marketing event, whoever is there experiencing that experience actually marries that with whatever brand is sponsoring or co-sponsoring the event. And so the person that's there, the attendee, is always going to almost like see it as synonymous, whatever that experience they had, whatever feeling they had when they were in that experience and in that event, they're going to always think of that brand. So experiential marketing is bringing your brand to life and actually creating almost like a memory, a real memory for the customer. So don't overlook that. I think it's really important. Yeah, Aaron is saying reminds her of Women of Color in Cannabis Brooklyn comedian series. So that sounds just about right. That's when you guys had a bunch of comics that were performing. So a lot of people probably think of you guys as, when they think of how much fun they had and the laughing that, whatever at the event, they're thinking Women of Color in Cannabis. It's the same thing. So to me, I love print is fine. Social media is okay. I'm not a fan of social media for obvious reasons, because we're in the cannabis industry and they don't like us very much.
Yeah.
That's neither here nor there. But experiential marketing, I think, is worth the ROI.
Okay.
It's
Thank you.
like, this is Patricia. It's like, show me, don't tell me. You know?
And I'm so glad she said that. That's
Thank you.
like, that's my statement. I'm very obnoxious, if y'all can't tell. So I'm very straightforward. And if someone tells me I can't do something, it's always, I can show you better than I can tell you.
The other Patricia on the call, my partner, that's definitely her motto as well. She's like, don't worry about it, Lo. You're trying your best on Instagram. It's about the work, and we're doing the work. So shout outs to both Pats for having that spirit and sharing that with us. Okay, so we covered marketing. Personally, I think legal is right up there with finances, right? You have to be legally compliant. You have to make sure that you are right with the government. It can change your life, and not for the better, if you are not right with the government, right? So finance in one way helps you, right? If you have to file your taxes, we know that, right? But you also need legal professionals. What are your operating structure, right? What are the governing laws for your company? What are the established, not only day to day, but the job description? Like, all of that has to be fleshed out. It has to be a legal binding document. When you're hiring and firing, once again, that triggers paperwork, which has to be legally compliant. So being a legal professional in cannabis is definitely a great way to say that you're participating in the cannabis industry without having to be plant touching, right? It's definitely, once again, a big bucket ancillary opportunity in cannabis. There's so many different types of legal professionals that you may need. You may need a trademark lawyer, right? And when you're dealing with cannabis, and just from Woke's experience, we're non-plant touching, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But once the government sees cannabis, they're not to say they'll deny you, but there's definitely going to be some follow-up. And you need a legal professional who can help walk you through that process, answer questions, respond in the 15 or maybe 30-day timeline that's allotted to you. Sometimes you may need a legal professional to even file certain documents, once again, like trademarking. Or even if you are going to attempt to be a nonprofit, you're dealing with the IRS. So you're going to need a legal professional to kind of walk you through that 501c3 or C4 paperwork. So being a legal professional, having a legal professional, it's super important. It's unavoidable if you're going to have any type of business, but especially a cannabis business. And once again, like Shawnee said, your state may have a medical program. If you're lucky, you may have a recreational program, but we're still dealing with in a federally illegal market. So having a legal professional who understands how to make sure that your business is fully compliant, that you're in a state that's letting you do that you have a business, a cannabis business, is very, very important. So Shawnee or Patricia, would you guys like to add anything to why it's so important to have a legal professional in cannabis, or the importance of just legality in general when dealing with cannabis?
I was going to say that if you have a legal mind kind of as part of your team, that can help you with your planning. Not just keep you out of trouble, but help you make plans for how you want to move forward in the future, because, you're going to be reading into regulations that exist presently for what you think is going to happen. So that's a different way of looking at the world and looking at what is possible, if you have somebody who is looking at policy and regulation from the standpoint, not just, is this a problem for us today, but what can we do with our business for the future if this is what it looks like now? I think that's why a legal mind is good. I mean, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a practicing attorney. It could be a paralegal. It could be someone who has been a secretary in a legal firm. I mean, again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit with transferable skills, but if this is an area and this is how you solve problems, it's there are lots of different ways to use those skills in the cannabis and hemp arena.
Okay, so we talked a lot, and what we wanted to do in this presentation is definitely cover and do a deep dive into what we felt like were the big buckets. So legal, finance, marketing, kind of what you would call like the pillars of any business. But there is, I don't want to say limitless opportunities, right? I'm not an infomercial, but there are a lot of opportunities in cannabis. So we wanted to do not only a highlight of the major ones, but these are definitely other ways. And this is not an exhaustive list, but others that we felt like we're mentioning. For example, payment processing. I don't know if Shawnee wants to help us out with that one, you know, also known as a POS system. So we are a nonprofit. Our POS is very simple. But Shawnee, as a for-profit business, you have a little bit more experience in that arena. So can you just share what that looks like, payment processing in cannabis?
POS is a whole other beast in and of itself, for obvious reasons, because it's handling money. So on the dispensary level, what you'll find is there are a lot of POS systems that open up, start, and then end up dissipating because the way the money is being funneled is across states or whatever, and that becomes money laundering for obvious reasons because the plan is federally legal. So payment processing is an interesting one. You don't necessarily have to be a merchant processor. You could also be a software company that creates a POS system that sits on top of, you know, whatever the state's verification system is for the dispensaries. There's tons of those. And then also you could technically be a hardware provider. So hardware that actually communicates with that software. So there's a lot of different, I feel like there's a lot of different options. On the flip side, a lot of dispensaries, as you guys may know, most of them accept cash only. Some of them don't. Like I have a dispensary that somehow uses some sort of POS system. I still don't understand how it works, but for the dispensaries that only accept cash, you could also be an ATM management company. So that's another, you know, alternative to payment processing, where you provide the dispensary an ATM and you get a certain fee every time someone does a transaction because they have to pay for their cannabis or their medicine in cash every time they make a transaction at the dispensary. So it's tricky, and you really have to know how money moves through, I would say, the federal bank and whatnot, but payment processing is definitely an option as an ancillary business.
That was a great point about the ATMs. Like a light bulb went off in my head, like, oh my God, like, you know, oftentimes we do these sessions and continuing education is important because we're consistently learning. I remember we had a session, I think 2 years ago, where we were talking about building out a business plan, how to go about getting funding. And we talked a little bit about Ancillary, and we had a guest speaker at the time named Ben, and all he did was fund ancillary businesses. Like he's like, I refuse to invest in anything that touches the plant. And he told us like, he made so much money off of light bulbs and soil. And I was just like, what? You never think of these things. He said, yeah, there's a lot of indoor grows that need special light bulbs. Or, you know, there's a lot of growers who would pay a premium for really good soil. And you just did that for me once again, Shawnee, with the ATM. That's ATMs. I see.
Not even that. So you guys, I'm sorry to cut you off, but a lot of people forget about the medical patients. In some states, you guys, medical patients can grow at home. So that's a whole other market that is technically untapped. So if you're in a market where people can grow at home, they can grow a certain number of plants, you could, you know, be a distributor or in between a B2B, or not a B2B, a distributor of like grow tent accessories and things like that. Fans. I just spent a lot of money on my grow tent. That's why I'm telling you all this. But lights for like the home grower are not going to be as industrial as the lights at an actual commercial cultivation center. But that's another option too.
Yeah. So thank you for Lightbulb. Anne also shared some comments, which I think is amazing. You can sell a nursery of clones and cuts to home growers. And like she said, there's such an opportunity for indoor and outdoor. Like there's so many opportunities. Obviously, depending on your state regulations, we do not want to recommend any illegal activity in your state. Just want to put that out there. But yeah, so thank you for sharing that on payment processing. But there's also data platforms, right? So that's a little bit different from payment processing, which focuses exactly on that, payment processing. Other data platforms can look like tracking. We know that tracking is very important in the regulated market. When we talk about seed to sale and walking through that process, that's when having a platform that's doing that for you is crucial and very important. So you can think about all those different softwares as you think about what are the processes or processes that accompany, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's packaging, whether it's from the cultivation, so straight from, the ground. They're going to need to track that. They're going to need some system that's going to allow them to provide that legal information so that they remain compliant. So you can be that person that if you're a coder and you understand how to do that kind of thing and overlay maps and all that good stuff, this may be your wheelhouse. So once again, we're not going to go into transferable skills yet, but there is a need for people who can build those data platforms to support the cannabis industry. Something that was not shocking, but I didn't think of until last year when Woke was at the not last year, the year before when we were at the CWCB conference, we met a lot of security professionals. And not only do they work in retail environments, so in the dispensary, but also transporting. If you know that you're sending, bulk pre-rolls, you're doing a fulfillment order and you're sending thousands, in some cases tens of thousands dollars worth of product or $100,000 worth of product, you're not just gonna send it on over and have good faith, right? It's nice to practice faith, but you want to make sure that you are being protected. So having a security professional that's actually in transport with your product is another way that you can get into the industry if you have that security background. Patricia or Shawnee, did you want to add anything to either industry specific platforms or security?
Yeah, a thought popped in my head as we diverted from payment processing to other options that might be available in terms of services and indoor-outdoor options. Something that popped in my head was, I see now that there are opportunities for, in New Jersey, they call them micro businesses, but perhaps in other states, they call them social equity businesses to participate. And one of the things that occurred to me based upon something that happened in my family is maybe you will also have the opportunity to contract with larger dispensaries. Maybe in some states there will be, I'm not going to call them set asides or anything like that, but maybe there will be opportunities for people to supply toilet paper, dirt, light, as subcontractors to larger MSOs or whatever. This might be worth looking into if you are an entrepreneur and even a security service. You might just be an independent security service. It's just a thought as you were talking. I wanted to just pop that into people's heads so that they didn't feel that they had to have this experience by working for someone else, but perhaps it could be their own business. And I see someone else has mentioned cybersecurity. We shouldn't forget that, right?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Anne. Physical and cybersecurity as well. Anne also had a great point. When building out these retail opportunities, so you're built, or even just if you're a processor, you're a cultivator, once again, if you're growing, you don't want to leave your facility and hope once again no one's going to break in, right? If you're drying your product, you've harvested, once again, you don't want to come back, open your location, and everything is gone. So not just your retail locations, not only just in transport, but a lot of facilities are going to need some kind of, once again, physical security, but also cyber security to make sure someone's not tampering with your lights, not to make sure that, you know, your sprinklers are going off when they need to and how they need to. So it's very important to think about all the ways that security is going to present itself in cannabis and how you can fill that gap. I do want to mention that New York State does have micro business licenses. So that was one of the things that we were really proud of seeing in the bill. And don't quote me on this, but we do believe that there will also in New York State be the opportunity for smaller businesses to partner with out-of-state larger corporations to supply, whether it's services, actual whole flower. That is something that we've heard that will be permissible in New York State as well. So micro businesses and contractual relationships with larger out-of-state MSOs. So like Patricia said, something you might want to think about. Okay, so obviously there's ancillary and there's plant touching, right? So would Shawnee or Patricia like to share what are the pros of entering the ancillary cannabis industry? We know that when people often think of cannabis, they go right to plant touching. They hear that quote of $1 billion. But I don't think they know that 1 billion is across the cannabis industry, right? Both ancillary and plant touching. It's just $1 billion industry, right? But specifically, what are the benefits of solely participating in the non-plant touching side of the industry?
So I'm a conspiracy theorist. And I strongly believe that the way the media spins the cannabis opportunity is to intentionally make people think that the opportunity is truly plant touching so that our focus is diverted. But I have made it my life's goal to tell everyone, based on whatever their experience is, how they can get into the industry. And so with that being said, some of the pros that I see is there's a lower barrier to entry. What I mean by that is you don't have to have $1 million to get on the ancillary side of the cannabis industry at all, depending on your business. Do not quote me on that, but depending on what you're doing, what services and products you're selling, you don't necessarily have to have $1 million to start up. You could very well start up with your own capital. In addition to that, the financial barriers are, I don't want to say non-existent, but they are lower. It's going to depend on the scope and nature of your work, and also what you named your company and what your logo looks like. But like banking tends to be less of a hassle when you're an ancillary company, like I said, depending on the scope of work. I would also say licensing and the expense that comes with licensing and compliance on top of that is not as much of a burden. So for example, if you were to apply to get a dispensary or to run a dispensary, you are going to have to go through that licensing process, which depending, on how you write your application can get very expensive, especially if you're paying consultants to help you write your application. In order to start, a company like myself, my company, or like what Patricia has, you don't have to go through a licensing process. You hit the ground running. And that's not to say there aren't any obstacles, but it's much easier. The barriers are much lower. In addition to that, when it comes to compliance, typically on the ancillary side, your compliance has to do more so with the nature of your work. And so if you're a lawyer, obviously you have certain compliance pieces that you have to adhere to, or accountants, or whatever you do, you have your own almost like industry or sector specific compliance regulatory requirements. But when it comes to like having a grow in a state, you have to work with usually that Department of Agriculture, the Cannabis Commission, and then you have to work with a bunch of other organizations. You got OSHA. You probably also have some sort of I don't want to say, technically, I guess FDA could get involved. It depends on what kind of products you're making, but you have so many different departments that could dip into your business and say, hey, we want to test this, or we want to do an inspection on this. And if you're out of compliance, then you can get hit with a fine, or you could be, disciplined, and you could technically lose your license depending on how serious that that situation is. So in my opinion, that's what the pros are. That's not all of them, but I think those are the major pros of having an ancillary business in the cannabis industry.
Patricia, would you like to add anything?
The only thing I was going to add was it made me think about, you guys may not remember this because you're too young, but in 1999, when everyone was wondering whether the clock would turn, in the year 2000, or if we'd have ears sticking out of our heads or whatever. But the conversation then began that there were no gatekeepers in the digital space. And so it was a flat space. Everybody had open opportunities, blah, blah. Of course, we found out that wasn't really true because, yes, everybody could go into the space and do whatever they wanted to do, but then you needed a distribution network in order for your voice to be heard. Well, here we have this change in culture somewhat again. And I would say that one of the pros is that there are fewer gatekeepers to getting started, like Shawnee said. So if you have an idea, a problem that you're trying to solve, and you can figure out who will pay for it, there's a good chance that you could get that off. And I think the other thing is that we're talking about the pros of entering the ancillary cannabis market, but we can't forget that hemp and cannabis are the same thing, and that they're the same plant, even though different cultivars. But so you could go toward the hemp part of the plant, rather than focusing solely on the cannabis aspect of the plant. So that too is another way of beginning, if you want to end up in that way, or maybe you want to stay over in the hemp part of the plant. So I think that that's another big pro. And you see a lot of people going that way because of the Farm Bill of 2018, which has that loophole making hemp legal and cannabis illegal.
Yes, thank you for sharing. So if you're interested in hemp, check out our last session, our last CannaCareers module 7, which was hemp. We wouldn't say versus, but compared to cannabis, and we talk about the differences, how that looks in the actual market, and how you can participate in the hemp industry as opposed to the cannabis or THC market. So it's very interesting. If you want to know, check out our last session, and it is accessible the entire 2 hours, the PowerPoint, the one-sheeter on our website, wocc.world/CannaCareers. So thank you, Shawnee, and thank you, Patricia. Basically, the gist is less compliance focused, less regulated, not to say an absence of regulation, but like Shawnee mentioned, it's a little bit easier to kind of navigate. It isn't so stringent, and there's less third-party interaction you're going to need for your business to stay compliant. I think Shawnee also mentioned it's a good way to think about what you're good at and jumping in immediately, right? Which I think is a really good segue for us to start talking about transferable skills, right? The easiest way to get in the industry is to do what you've been doing, right? Obviously, you need to have a cannabis context, but no one's asking you, or no one should be asking you to recreate the reel, right? You should, and the easiest way is to say, what have I done? What's my classic experience? Was I a paralegal? Did I work in retail? How, what's your educational background, or even what your passion is that you've just been working on for the past 10 years, but it wasn't your day-to-day job. Whatever experience you may have is the opportunity to kind of do so in cannabis. So I don't know if Shawnee or Patricia wants to start, but I think it'd be worthwhile for us to go through the previous roles or industries in the ancillary cannabis market and kind of see if you guys can mention some useful transferable skills. So for marketing, do you have, or should you have, or are you limited to being an actual marketing professional, Or if you've built a personal brand, can you now come into cannabis and say you have that marketing experience? Let me know if that's a confusing question. I can try to clean it up.
I would say it depends on the level of the opportunity. So if you're coming into like a multi-state operation and they have a marketing role available, they're probably going to want to see some sort of proof that you have marketing experience. They may even require a degree in marketing. It just kind of depends on the organization. But if you're talking about, starting your own, brand or strategy type agency in the cannabis space, you have a little bit more flexibility, but you're probably going to also start off pretty slow and, demand a lower, I would say, fee as you're starting to kind of gain your industry experience. It just kind of depends. When you're looking for an opportunity within an organization that's already existing, I swear they try to make the highest requirements. And you're like, so you want a PhD for minimum wage? That doesn't make sense. So I feel like it's much easier if you're really, really passionate about something that you do, even if it's for fun, and you can't necessarily put on your resume, to maybe start out, maybe volunteering with nonprofit organizations that need the help, so you can put it on your resume and say, this is the work I've done, and here's my portfolio and things like that.
And what do you think would be some keywords that would be useful or experiences, words that you should highlight in experiences that you've had when thinking about entering the marketing industry?
I typically, when I'm recruiting, I like to see that someone who's in marketing can actually quantify their work. So what I mean by that is actually show me that you've taken a brand from this many views on their website per month to this many views on their website per month, or you've taken their following on social media from this to this, or you've produced an event that ended up having this many attendees, something like that. I want to be able to see that you, first of all, are tracking your accomplishments and can articulate the accomplishments based on the scope of work. That's just me from the point of view of a recruiter.
And I think we also covered legal professionals, right? So what are the job descriptions that you often see for legal professionals? And does it vary as far as experience? But what do you typically see in your experience when companies are looking to have or hire a legal professional? Are they looking for?
I would say, and I don't know if it's because of the work that I do, but I see more legal need. I see more need for legal on the advocacy side. That I think that's just from my experience on the type of work that I've been focusing on. I can't really. I've also seen legal roles within the state departments that actually regulate the cannabis industry more. That sounds bad because it sounds like I'm saying that the cannabis industry is not focused on legal. That's not what I'm saying, but it sounds like that's what I'm saying. But I've seen more opportunities like working for the state department, the Cannabis Commission within the market to make sure, compliance and things like that are. In fact, I've actually worked closely with one of the department lawyers here in Illinois. And then on the advocacy side, really having someone who knows expungement law and is helping nonprofit organizations, help people with expungements. And that could lead to, that's not to say that that's not paid. It's not necessarily pro bono. A lot of nonprofit organizations are able to bring in funding based on the work that they do. Sometimes they do have to show that they have a track record and they've made some sort of, they've done something in their community. And if they can actually quantify that and show that on a piece of paper, they can get state funding to actually continue that work for it to be paid for the lawyer. I can't really speak to, I haven't recruited for lawyers within the MSOs.
Thank you. Patricia, what are some transferable skills that if you want to play the role of an educator? So we're not talking compliance, which is plant touching, but I'd like to think that your work with Cannaboomers was very much education based and rooted. So what were some transferable skills that you had that made you feel pretty confident to say that, hey, I can educate my community?
Well, I'm a writer and a researcher and a thinker. I solve problems. And so when there's something that I want to know, I generally educate myself by talking to people who are smarter than me and really trying to translate that for a larger audience. That was really my starting point, where I was trying to learn and understand and then figure out how many different types of people I needed to talk to have a broad understanding of the industry so that I could then position myself in a place that I could be more useful or more valuable for others. So that's kind of like a confluence of kind of who I am, generally speaking, but that brought to bear my research, my marketing, my legal, my analytical mind, that's sort of a mixture of all of those things. I think the one thing that I was thinking as Shani was talking, and it may be something that Woke will be working with prospective clients with, is that if you're not a botanist or you're not a law school dropout like I was, then how can you take your skills to reinterpret those? Like, if you cannot necessarily quantify them in the language of the digital sphere, how do you begin to talk about real life experiences where you had to solve problems? Like, you bought 6 pieces of property and you did X, Y, and Z. How do you change that language to this industry so that people can see? I mean, I guess you could really do that with an MSO. You could show that I know how to raise the value of things. And I've done that with property, in my life. And I could do that for you in a different kind of way. I'm just trying to make the point that it's not all apples and oranges, because I've seen job descriptions in the cannabis industry where you needed to have graduated from MIT, and they were saying that they wanted a botanist or people who knew, and these were people who maybe had been in the legacy market and didn't have that degree, but they're the people who know the answer to what's being asked. So, I'm just saying that transferable skills are that you really have to sort of look deeply and have somebody else help you understand what they are. And of course, Shani knows the language of the people that the clients, so she knows kind of how to take your information and put it in a language that they would understand. So people should really not play themselves cheaply, is what I'm saying. If you've been on the planet, 40 years, for example, you have transferable skills. That's really the message that I'm trying to impart at this point.
That's definitely the problem with the cannabis industry. Like, I 100% agree. It's credentialism at its finest. It's not.
That's awful, though. That's awful.
Oh no, 100%. It's 1000%, because you have a lot of people who are up there in the C-suite of those particular organizations that probably didn't finish college. So but that is, I think, America. I think that is capitalism. And this is why I really only work with companies that say they're focused on a certain initiative. And I go toe to toe with whoever the hiring manager is. If I send you somebody, it's because I sent them for a reason. And if you're telling me you don't see anything on their resume, or you've spoken to them and you don't think because they said something like this, that you read it wrong, that you're not going to move forward with the second interview, you better believe I'm going to go back and forth with you. This goes back to me being very obnoxious.
And Shawnee, do you move your neck like that?
I sure do. 100%. Danielle, out of all the people on this call, I would say Danielle probably knows me best, and Danielle could probably attest. I do play nice and I'm diplomatic, but I also know that there is a system in place to create barriers for certain types of people. And it's not just minorities, it's not just women, it's people who are of a certain age, it's people who are disabled, it's all types of different demographics. And so Patricia is 100% right, 1000% right.
Yes. I was going to say thank you, Patricia, for sharing that. And if there is any takeaway that you should get from this specific section on transferable skills, is like Patricia said, everything can be, massaged, and it's not lying, but there is a scope. There is a way that you can take your experience and package it in a way that would be useful to a hiring manager, or that can be informative to a position. So I'm going to do 2 shameless plugs right now. One is we do have a worksheet so that you guys are able to take notes. I just realized that it's an hour into it and we did not share it with you all, but that's perfectly fine. We're sharing it with you now. It's currently in the chat. You can download it. It's also going to be on our website after this. So will the presentation as well. So feel free to rewatch the presentation. Feel free to click through the slides and fill out that worksheet. And to answer your question, Patricia, Woke does help people, listen to me. Woke helps people do that very thing. So through our CannaCareers program, which includes not only these informational sessions, we also have 30-minute resume workshops, and they're completely free, and you sign up and you meet with Danielle, who once again is one of our lovely CannaCareer partners. And we also have Amber McDonald, who is a woman of color. She owns and has her own kind of employment services company where she works with potential clients who are looking to enter the cannabis industry. She helps them with education, repackaging their cover letters and their resumes. So you're able to book a free 30-minute session with either Danielle or Amber, and they literally do that very thing. They take a look at your resume, they ask you questions and just your general work experience, but your life experience. And by the end of that session, you should have a reworked resume that is cannabis specific. If you had an opportunity in mind, we encourage you to share that with them so that they can further help, build out what your resume should look like. But if you have no idea and you just want to get into the cannabis industry, they can also help you create a general cannabis resume using your, classic resume that you're currently using now. So if you'd like to sign up for that service, that's also on our CannaCareers page with all this content, like the presentations and the worksheet. So Patricia, if you need help with your resume, if you know anyone who needs help with their resume, please feel free to book a session. It is free, and Danielle and Amber are both awesome. We've gotten great feedback. We do send surveys and we've heard great things. So definitely sign up on the CannaCareers page site. So let's move on. So you've met with someone, you know what your keywords are. What should your resume look like and feel like? I know a lot of people try to throw everything on the paper, but that may not be the best way. You might be giving too much personal information. So Shawnee, when people are trying to get into the industry, what should their cannabis resume look and feel like?
I typically gravitate towards people who don't shy away from being their full selves on paper. Because, and I think this is because of my personal experience, I came from corporate America, and I realized as a Black woman working in corporate America how much you kind of don't bring your full self to work. And so you get used to that, really masking you mask you to fit in with whatever the organization is that you have conformed to for a paycheck. And so for me, I really appreciate candidates who don't shy away from that, who can say, hey, this is what I do, especially in the cover letter as well. So we're not just talking about the resume, but you're not afraid to tell me your story. and have a little fun with your resume. It doesn't have to be dry. It could be whatever your personality is, like showing that whatever way you feel really shows that on the piece of paper. I think I gravitate towards those types of candidates. And the reason being is because I think employee experience to me is, because once again of my experience in corporate America, is really important. And I want people to, if I can see the real you through your resume and I call you and I can feel it over the phone, I know that you're going to go to whatever the organization is and you're going to feel comfortable being your full self. It helps me make a better match, if that makes sense, because I can see you for you and make sure that I'm matching you with the right organization, so you have a great employee experience. I hope that makes sense. That sounds weird, actually, now that I'm listening to myself say it out loud, but hopefully it makes sense.
No, it does make a lot of sense, because you want to make sure that, and it's similar in nature to what Woke's mission is creating safe spaces. You don't want to recommend someone pursue an opportunity when you know the company culture is not conducive to that person. It makes complete sense that you know, if it's not a company that supports the LGBTQ community or supports, you know, marginalized communities, they don't, you know, they're not at least taking a stance on wanting to create inclusivity in their company. Hopefully that I said that right. Feels wrong. You don't want to send someone there who's going to feel uncomfortable. So it makes complete sense what you just said. And I think we're going to touch on that point in the presentation as well. So just to kind of, once again, kind of wrap up the resume, obviously we're keeping it objective, right? We want to be very clear in our resume with the experience that is relevant to this job, right? If it is a finance opportunity, then you do want to mention any bookkeeping you've done, whether it's, you know, for your family company, that's still a company. Yes, you were keeping your mom and dad's books for, you know, your candle company, and you weren't like a paid, you know, employee, but if you were the person doing that bookkeeping, that is definitely worth mentioning. But your lemonade stand from when you were in preschool may not be relevant experience. Yes, it's finance, but it's not relevant. So you want to make sure that, yes, you're giving information that's going to, you know, inform your experience, so that you have experience, but you don't want to just throw things on the paper because you feel like it's good information to know, right? But you also want to list memberships and certifications, but the same rules apply that are relevant, right? If you were a Girl Scout top seller, maybe not so much, right? But if you're a part of a professional organization, you're up to date with your, you know, maybe your bookkeeping certifications, that's something worth mentioning, because it shows not only are you a part of an organization, but you're up to date, and that increasing your knowledge that is important to you. Because for most memberships, that's ongoing. There are some instances where it's a one-time membership, but memberships run out. So it shows that you're staying up to date in your field, that you are staying current in your field, and that it's important to stay up to date too. Certifications prove that you take that extra step, right? You've done something to kind of expound on your experience. It shows that you're willing to not go above and beyond, but once again, you're interested in furthering your expertise, furthering your knowledge and your education. Are there any memberships or certifications that either of you ladies would recommend to those wanting to get into the cannabis industry?
I don't want to say like there's specific memberships, but I will say this. When I am looking at a resume, if you can show me that you joined, you know, a Women of Color in Cannabis, a Illinois Women in Cannabis, National Cannabis Industry Association, or Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and then joined a committee, and then volunteer on that committee, whatever that committee may be. It could be marketing, it could be events, it could be education, whatever that committee may be, and say, these are some of the things that I've done. I serve as this committee chair. And then we get on the phone and you kind of talk to me about what you've learned, and what that means. You are really showing that you are investing. Because remember, most of the people who are volunteering for these organizations, they have full-time jobs. Like, they actually have a life. And so it's really hard to have a full-time job, a life, a family to worry about, and also volunteer for these organizations. But it shows that you're really interested and you're investing in yourself Those organizations, there's so many of them, nonprofit, advocacy groups, coalitions, that you going to the meetings monthly or weekly, you're going to get so much information. You're going to network so much, and you're going to keep up to date with what's going on locally in your market as well. I can't stress how invaluable, and it's giving back to your community. You guys have to understand that this plant has such a crazy history. And so you can't come into this industry and not understand what's happening in the underbelly of it. And you learn a lot about what's happening in the underbelly when you're volunteering to do things for these organizations, if that makes sense.
It does.
This is Patricia, and I just want to add and sort of a non-traditional approach to this, because I'm one of these people who has never gotten a job based on a resume. And some of that is just because I didn't have the services of someone like Shani to make sense of my life experience or the things that I've done to funnel them to, a client, so to speak. So if I didn't have the opportunity to speak to the client so the client could have some idea of how talented I am, then, then they might want the paper. But if I didn't really have an opportunity to sell myself to Shani or to Shani's client, that might not have worked for me, So I just want to say that if you happen to be someone who has forged your life in a way that may not make immediate sense on paper, that you can still do all of these things with the help of someone whose skill it is to do that, The other thing is, I was thinking that about the memberships and certifications. This is like a mistake that I think perhaps I made in the industry, because I really didn't understand which organizations were doing things that would allow me an opportunity to learn. I was always sort of on the periphery of the memberships. And I was also focused on a national understanding of what was happening rather than a local. To be honest, until the last election, when I realized I needed to focus on my own neighborhood and to get invested in what's going on here, I didn't do that, because I was looking at what was happening on the West Coast, what's happening in Chicago, what's happening in New York. And so that left me sort of scattered and unable to do kind of exactly what Shani has recommended. So I am saying all that to say that I realize that my skills I have to bring to my own community, that I can take them nationally as well, but there's definitely importance and value in operating inside the community that you live in, and that I'm an old horse coming to that conclusion, an old good horse.
And thank you, Shani, for sharing that. LinkedIn is also a great place for cannabis networking. I think what you said, Patricia, is a great segue to, did I skip one? Yes, cover letter. I think it's perfect to feel like in a resume, I can't quite really speak to all of my gifts, my skill sets, my experience. And a cover letter is really an opportunity to really talk about your experience in a way that you can apply it to whatever the job opportunity is. So once again, you want to make sure that you're tailoring your cover letter more so than your resume, that should be, very specific for your job descriptions, your past job descriptions, and outline, what you've done. Your cover letter is really your opportunity to hone in on the job description, to kind of pick it apart and build your experience around what they're asking for. They're asking for you to be in charge of creating, monthly impact statements, saying that you've done that for a membership organization would be definitely useful to putting in your cover letter and really expounding on how it is did you go about putting together statements? Where were you pulling your different data sets from? But the cover letter is really your opportunity to more so flush out your experiences, to kind of, once again, create that context through, storytelling and that guidance from a Shawnee or Danielle or Amber to make sure that, yes, it's not classic experience, but it is experience that can inform your day-to-day responsibilities. Yeah, you want to show off what you can do. I think, Shawnee, you talked about your personality as well, that this is a nice place where you can, once again, really kind of cue in the hiring manager, the hiring individual into who you are. Are you a team player? Do you work well under pressure? Are you pretty lighthearted and can take a joke? All those things would be worthwhile in knowing because, like Shawnee said, company culture is important, right? And they want to know before even scheduling an interview, is this person worth it? To hate to be crass, but is their experience going to be experience that's worthwhile? And what kind of team member are we adding to our team, right? Because essentially you are joining a team. Yes, it's a company, it could be a nonprofit, it can be a business association or alliance, but you are joining a team and you want to make sure that there's going to be cohesion and not, competing priorities and things like that. Shawnee or Patricia, would you guys like to weigh in on the importance or ways in which we should be thinking about a cover letter?
The only thing I would add about the cover letter is I would, before writing it, I always tell people to do like your research on the organization as much as you can. Remember, I'm a professional stalker, so take this with a grain of salt. But if you have time, if it's something that you don't necessarily have to do this for every single application that you submit, because depending on where you are in your job search process, sorry, I have a 6-month-old that is not happy right now. But if you do your research and, find out that there are some things that really align with your values that have to do with that particular organization, and maybe you may be able to find like some connections that you have with people who already work within the organization on LinkedIn, reach out, see what information gathering you can do before you actually draft your cover letter. I was talking to one of our colleagues that is in Danielle's mentoring program, and she was thinking about, she's a lawyer, she's coming out of her fellowship, and she's looking to get into something else similar to what she's doing. So she wants to get into corporate social responsibility, and she's identified a role that she's interested in. And I said, before you submit your resume, see if you can find the hiring manager, do some research on the company, run past Danielle if you think you should reach out to this hiring manager, this recruiter. She may or may not be the hiring manager, but she says she's a recruiter and she's the only one on LinkedIn. See if you can get some information about what they're really looking for before you draft your cover letter, before you submit your application. That's what I would suggest before you actually start, writing your cover letter, is really try and see how much information you can really gather about the organization so that your cover letter stands out.
I was looking at LinkedIn this morning, and I don't know if you're aware or if you've read any of Simon Sinek's work, but he did a TED Talk, and the TED Talk takeaway was that people don't hire for skills, that they hire for attitude, that you can always teach skills. So consistent with what Shawnee just said, if you can get some idea about what the this is what people don't really talk about. Employers don't generally share, I'm looking for somebody who knows how to pick the ball up and, run the pass. And, they don't ever really tell you what they're really looking for. They just come with a lot of things that really, Shawnee says they're intangibles, but intangibles is really what they're looking for. And you want to figure out kind of what those are and how to plug into that language so that they can see, oh, she might be somebody who gets us, or he might be someone who gets us.
Thank you.
Or they might be somebody who gets us.
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think that's a perfect segue to interviewing and negotiating. you should have done your research for the cover letter, but if not, you should definitely do your research for the interview. Once again, you want to know a couple of maybe fun facts about the employer. You want to be prepared with questions. You want to demonstrate that you've done the research and that you know who they are, and you're not just here for any opportunity that comes your way. You want to kind of, make it seem as if that you're really excited to have this opportunity with this specific employer. You want to make sure that you come prepared with questions. For example, we are talking about ancillary opportunities. A possible question is, do they plan to eventually venture out into plant touching, depending on where you're interviewing? If it's, I'm blanking right now. Maybe it's a laboratory right now that you're in the marketing department, or not even, it's just a marketing department for labs. Do they eventually want to open their own labs because they're seeing the opportunities that there's a gap and there's not enough labs out there, and everyone they're working with has science background and they're thinking about expanding? That would be something good to know. And you would know that hopefully through researching the employer, and maybe that triggers a question. You want to plan ahead. If you're someone like me who gets very nervous, it would be worthwhile to kind of go over your questions, right? Go over just, introducing yourself, speaking to some of your experiences. Maybe you want to practice with a friend who can ask you, the stereotypical questions. What attracted you to our company? And tell us a little bit about yourselves, just so that one, you're comfortable saying and speaking about yourself and your experience, but two, so that you can get feedback. I like my friends to be really involved and say, I don't like that answer to that question, or, oh, when you said this, that was really nice. So having that kind of practice should make you feel a lot more comfortable and going into your interview. But also be prepared to negotiate. Walk in with, whether it's a secret list of your questions and your requirements, like you don't want compensation less than this. If you're asking questions about their healthcare packages, if that's important to you, how many sick days, you want to really not be too aggressive, but you also want to make sure that your needs are also being met, that you're walking into a company that's interested in answering those questions for you and really being responsive to the things that may be your concern. So it's not the time to come with a laundry list, but maybe your high level things that are very important to you and the questions that you really want to get answered. If having a employee handbook is important to you, that may be a question that you want to ask. Is it possible, do we have an employee handbook, or how do we handle instances of this, and this? Those are important questions, and you might want to ask that in your interview, so it seems like you actually care about joining the company and you're buying into their company culture. Patricia or Shawnee, do you have any advice for when interviewing with a company?
I do not.
Okay.
They are interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. Mm-hmm. And this just goes back to what I was saying. I remember when I've always had a mentor, probably since I was a preteen. I've always had a mentor or mentors. And I remember after grad school, my mentor, he's a Korean dude in LA. And he was the first person that interviewed me for a role that I got. And after I got the role, he's like, please don't be that professional ever again. And I was like, excuse me? Like, what are you talking about? Because once I got the job, they saw the real me and they were like, this is not, why were you so like uptight and high strung in this interview? And I'm like, because that's what everyone tells you to be. Everyone tells you to sit up straight and wear the white, collared shirt and, the black pants and have your hands crossed. And he literally was like, please don't do that again. And actually, I got that feedback for a few years before I was like, okay. And I think I was pushing somewhere near 30. And I was like, I should probably listen to what people are saying, because they're all saying the same thing, that my first impression interview is nothing like the real me. But like I said, as a minority woman, I think we have like it's just like a instinct to want to not kind of ruffle feathers or stand out too much when it comes to interviewing. And so I would definitely say it's hard. It's really hard, like, especially if you're that person that really wants to make sure you make a good impression. It's hard to say, okay, I'm just going to be myself. But you get more and more comfortable with it. I think the older you get, to be completely honest with you, because you just don't care anymore. But I do think that's important, because like I said, you want to make sure that they're a right fit for you, just like they want to make sure you're the right fit for them.
Yes. Thank you for sharing, because I definitely agree with what you said. Like in interviews, I consider myself a fro baby. Like I usually have like my hair out or some kind of thing, but I found myself like every time I had a job interview, I was like, I got to schedule time to straighten my hair. When am I going to do this? Right. And you felt like you said, Shirley, that you had to package yourself a little bit differently in order to be received the way you wanted to be. And we tell ourselves like, oh, I might not be accepted, or I may not be what they're looking for. So you try to make yourself as palpable as you can. I mean, I get my nails as long as I usually love to, or wear nails at all when I have a job interview. I will straighten my hair, do like a sleek back bun or something, because I don't want my physical appearance, like there's something I can do about being Black, but there is something I can do about my hair, right? There is something I can do about my nails, and we try to kind of make ourselves palpable. So thank you for sharing that. We shouldn't have to do that, and we can still be professional while being authentic to our true selves. I think the takeaway for me is what you said is not only are they interviewing you, but you're interviewing them as well. And you need to find, do you feel as if you'll fit in, and is their company alignment with your personal alignment and things that are important to you? So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I remember graduating my senior year from college and interviewing for a district manager role, I think, for Aldi. And my nails were really, really long. Mm-hmm. And he was like, yeah, you would have gotten the district manager role. I just felt you were too girly. And I was like, you felt that I was too girly because, mind you, he wasn't supposed to give me this feedback. Now that I have my background in human resources, I'm like, that was totally illegal. But anyhow, you were too girly. And I said, how do you figure? Well, you came to the interview with a skirt on and you had long nails. And I'm like, bruh. It's so crazy that women experience this type of stuff when it comes to the workforce. But you guys remember right now, the Great Resignation is happening. And what that means is it's a candidate's market, and you can command what you want from an organization right now. That's the reality of it all.
That's amazing. I like that. Great Resignation. Okay. Alrighty, so you've got the job. They offered you the position. You're there, and it is not going well. What do you recommend, Patricia or Shawnee, to navigating a hostile work environment?
I got fired, so I don't know.
But if you don't mind sharing, how did you escalate the situation? Did you share with the manager? Did you highlight the section in the employee handbook and they didn't appreciate that, or did you just flip your lid? All things are acceptable and okay.
No, let's see. I mean, for me, I just brought it to their attention that they weren't following the law, in their bidding processes. And I showed them a couple of times because I couldn't believe they were just really breaking the law. And then they said that I didn't have a job anymore, that they were, that maybe I wanted unemployment,
Please tell me you did an EEOC.
No, I didn't. It was the city of New York. And basically they just didn't really want me around because I was too alert, I guess.
Too knowledgeable, which is never a bad thing.
Yeah, it was okay because it was not a nice environment as it turned out. It really wasn't a good environment, and it gave me an opportunity to collect unemployment and figure out something else that I wanted to do. But basically, they didn't really want me in that environment,
I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad that you're out of that toxic environment.
For sure.
Shawnee, would you like to share about navigating hostile work environments?
It was the same for me. I did get fired, but I definitely did an EEOC claim and I got paid because I keep receipts, just like it sounds like Patricia does. But I mean, you want to approach HR. And unfortunately with the cannabis industry, HR kind of is in its infancy. It's not doing that great. And so I have talked to a lot of people in the cannabis industry who said they have spoken to HR, thought of an actual investigation or something was going to come of it, and nothing did, which is unfortunately, that's more so the rule than the exception in the cannabis industry. So with that being said, I think being prepared to make your next move and exit is always a good thing, which would kind of bring me back to, I think, what we were kind of the point we were trying to make about networking, and really, like Patricia was saying, it's not necessarily your skill set, but it almost is like your attitude and how people kind of see you. I think that's really important. And I know plenty of people that can kind of jump from one organization to the next because they've created relationships and they fostered those relationships. And so when they get in a situation when they're in a hostile work environment, they deuce, they peace out. A lot of people don't have time nor the energy. We're in the middle of what one of my team members says, a panty. We're in the middle of a panty, okay? Nobody wants to deal with the nonsense.
Yeah.
Peace of mind is so important right now, I think, for a lot of people. And like I said, it's a cannabis market. It's not always going to be a cannabis market, but right now, I think people should take advantage of the fact that it's a cannabis market and move on to the next.
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing. Know your rights. It's very important to know what they can and cannot do. If that means referencing and keeping that employee handbook close, then you keep it very close, right? Like Shawnee said, there may not be a fully supportive HR department or even a professional. They may be working with a third-party HR department, but just be aware of the internal structure, who you would go to if you wanted to escalate a situation outside of your manager. Is there a third party? Is there some kind of impartial party that you can speak with? But also, like Shawnee said, seek community and resources, right? Now I know that I don't plan on working for anyone, but if I happen to and they fire me unjustly, I'm going to be like, Shawnee, what is that EE? What's that file? Because we are filing it, right? So having a community, having resources and people that you can kind of call on who do have that experience, definitely Shawnee as a resource. Danielle will be my resource as well. But people who are in the HR side, the back end side of things, who can kind of say, oh yeah, that's not right. That shouldn't have happened. Here's how you now navigate the situation. But building that community and having those folks that you can talk to and lean on are definitely all recommendations that, you know, we would make to you if you find yourself in a hostile work environment, or if, like Patricia, you're seeing things happen that are illegal, and you want to make sure that you are not liable for what's happening for the greater institution that you're employed with. So those are our pieces of advice to you all. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you guys so much. I feel like I learned a lot of things.